All right, so let's go over metric prefixes. Metric prefixes are sort of the last step in this whole, scientific notation, engineering notation process. So ultimately what we're getting to with engineering notation is metric prefixes. So when you're done with this lesson, you should be able to convert from scientific and standard notation to a metric prefix, okay? So you're actually, I mean, if you're working in an energy field or you're working in a science field, you more likely than not are seeing metric prefixes on a daily basis. These are just a couple of examples. Kilowatt hours, okay, the kilo here is your prefix. Millimeters, milli is the prefix. Milliliters, again, it's milli. Kilometers is actually kilo is your prefix. So these are just some examples. There's any number of them out there. But you've probably seen these units, even if you don't work in one of these science fields, you've probably seen these units. Well, these actually involve metric prefixes, and this is sort of how it works. So metric prefixes are a quick and easy way to express engineering notation. So again, it's all about, you have very large quantities or very small quantities. You don't want to deal with a bunch of zeros and commas, so forth. So you can use scientific notation, you can use engineering notation, and really the quickest way to do this is to use metric prefixes. So here's how you do it. So the way we're going to do it, I mean, you can, again, there's a number of ways to do this, but the sort of step-by-step way that we're going to do it at first, until you really get used to using the units, is you're going to start with converting to scientific notation, then to convert to engineering notation. If you feel comfortable going right to engineering notation, that's fine. But you have to get to engineering notation first. And then based on your engineering notation, you're going to use a chart to figure out which metric prefix and colloquial term. And I'll explain what colloquial term is here in a second. All right, so it's really that easy. Get to engineering notation, and then then you find your prefix. And that's really what it boils down to. So a couple of important notes here. One, you cannot double up on prefixes. So you can't have, for example, a kilowatt hour. Okay, 1, 2 prefixes. Don't do that. Okay, or a mega kilowatt hour, or I don't know, a giga megajoule. I don't know, any number of things. You don't want to double up on these prefixes. Okay, it's not valid. So that's one thing to point out that I've seen people do in the past. Well, there you go. So to use prefix to kilowatt hour, to sort of expand on that example, if you want to convert from a kilowatt hour to something else, what you're going to want to do is go from a kilowatt hour down to your base unit, which is a watt hour, and then convert and then use your metric prefix. Okay. Um, with all units except for BTUs, you're not going to use a prefix with your English units. Okay, so your English distant units, you're not going to use them with. So you're not going to have a kilofoot or a megafoot or a megamile. As cool as that sounds, we're not going to do that, okay, because it's just not used out there. Like I said, the one exception here is that they do often use for BTUs, and we'll go over those in a second. So as the semester progresses, we'll start using more and more units, but you'll see that we use consistently, some very consistently. Okay, so how do we do this? So here's our metric prefix chart. This looks really kind of ugly, but this is everything. You'll notice, let's just kind of break this chart down. So let's look at this here. So this is scientific. Really, it's engineering notation. You notice you have minus 12, minus 9, minus 6, minus 3. Okay, and then your base unit, and then you have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Notice those are all multiples of 3. Okay, so they're multiples of 3. And that's our engineering notation. Okay, which, scientific notation is engineering notation. There are a few exceptions here, like we have, the 10 to the minus 2, 10 squared, 10, 10 to the first, so to speak. But by and large, we're just going to stick to the ones that have the power of 3 involved, okay? So there's that. And so really you want to think of this as you're sort of substituting, right? So if you have something times 10 to the, let's go 10 to the 9th, for example. Okay, anything times 10 to the 9th is giga. Okay, so that's your metric prefix. Okay, and then your colloquial term over here. Colloquial just means, in a general sense, colloquial means like sort of a local dialect, a matter of speaking. So colloquial is like, what do you actually call, if you have something that's, a giga or 10 to the ninth, how do you sort of say that in common language, at least in English? And you would say billion. Okay, so colloquial, thousand, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, um, and then millionth, billionth, trillionth. Okay, you've used these before. You just probably didn't call them colloquial terms. All right, so let's do a couple of examples. Before I do this, I want to point this out. This is actually really important. That when we do the metric prefix chart works for every um, unit, every base unit, but for BTUs, there's this one exception. That's if you have a million BTUs. Okay, so normally a million is mega. Okay, but for BTUs, it's MMBTU, and you just say MMBTU. You don't say mega BTUs, it's MMBTUs. It's a weird convention, has to do with like Roman numerals, but anyway, don't worry about it. Just know that when we say a million BTUs and you want a metric prefix, use MMBTUs, okay? So let's look at these quantities, and we'll go one by one from left to right, and start here with our 22 million watts, which is a colloquial term. But we'll start with, we'll go the scientific notation, engineering notation, the abbreviation, the colloquial term. So I'll run through this first one quickly and then see if you can do the others and then follow through, okay? So we have 22 million watts. You should know that to do scientific notation, you go 3, 6, 7, okay? So that's 2.2 times 10 to the 7th. Hold on to your unit here. Always hold on to your unit. So 2.2 times 10 to the 7th watts. And then to convert to engineering notation, of course, we want to get this to a multiple of 3. So we're going to actually subtract 1 to get to 6. And if you subtract, that means you make this bigger. Okay, so that's 22 times 10 to the 6 watts. And hopefully after a while you'll realize that you can go right to your engineering notation. So let's look at this number real quick. So we have 22 million. Okay, so here's your decimal point. And you know the nice thing about these big numbers is that they're separated by commas, and the commas are all 3 zeros, or 3 places anyway. So we know with 2 of them it's 3 and 6. So you could stop right there and say go right from this number to your engineering notation after you get some practice. 22 times 10 to the 6th. Okay, now let's look for our metric prefix. So 1 times 10 to the 6th is a capital M, so capitalization counts here. So it's 22 megawatts. Pretty straightforward. And then our colloquial term for 10 to the 6th is million, so it's 22 million watts. Okay, it's really that easy. So if you have the chart handy, you can get the engineering notation, you're good to go. Okay, so I would take a second and see if you can get these other ones and press pause right now. Okay, so 22 billion joules, so just go through this quickly. It's 2.2 times 10 to the 10th if you count over. And to do engineering notation, you notice there are 9 zeros there before the first comma. So it's 22 times 10 to the 9th joules. We go to our chart here, 10 to the 9th is giga, capital G, so 22 gigajoules. And then the colloquial term, you probably know this already, is billion joules, okay? Last one here, we're going to do this horrible number over here, which is 3, 6, 7, 8. So it's 5.4. Remember, we're going to the right. So 5.4 times 10 to the minus 8 meters. So the minus 8, remember, we're always going to, for our purposes, we're going to subtract from our exponent to get to a multiple of 3. So we're going to subtract 1 to get to 9. 54 times 10 to the minus 9th. And so now we come up to our chart here, minus 9th is nano. So if in case you were wondering, that's what a nano means. So nanometer, you may have heard this term before. So 54 nanometers. And then the colloquial term is not 54 billionth meter, it's 54 billionths of a meter. You probably know that, but hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so now I'm going to go to a new sheet of examples. And I'm not going to have the chart here, but I'm going to run through this pretty quickly to save time. So this is the same exercise as before. So you're going to go from standard standard to scientific to engineering to metric to colloquial. So I posted a chart on Blackboard, and so use your chart and run through these real quick, and then press pause, and I'll see if you got them right. Okay, so go ahead and press pause. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all this explanation. There's really nothing special here. You get to engineering notation, it's 42.3 times 10 to the third watt hours. So anything times 10 to the third is kilo. So this is where a kilowatt hour comes from. It's a kilowatt hour is 1,000 watt hours, okay, which is a unit conversion. So that's what 42.3 kilowatt hours really means in your base unit. That's 42.3 thousand watt hours, or 42,300 watt hours. Okay, so this one right here with the decimal place. So if you count over, it's 3 times 10 to the minus 4. Engineering is minus 6. So minus 6, if you look on your chart, is micro. This is a mu, which is a Greek letter, micro. So that's 300 micrometers is usually how people say it. And then it's a millionth, so 300 millionths of a meter. And lastly, we have this BTU number, which you get to your engineering notation is 10 to the 6th, 10 to the 6th. Remember, it's a mega, but for BTUs, it's MMBTU, really important, it's MMBTU. And then your colloquial is 9.003 million BTUs, okay? And that's it for your metric prefix lesson.